It doesn't matter how many tools you have or coping mechanisms or something. If you're always working in fear or you're always working where there's like a deficit for yourself personally, you eventually will go down with the ship. You can't continue to do it until you start to take that time and really like sit with yourself and be like, what do I need? And how can I show up in life in the way that feels the best to me? And it's this like kind of dichotomy of it feels selfish, but it's actually the most unselfish thing you can do, because by allowing yourself to be more present in your life and more present in what you want to do, you're able to help so many more people. And that's really like a story I had to navigate, releasing like the idea of like the guilt and the, I'm leaving my comrades at the bedside and like this kind of thing for my own personal thing to be like, no, but you're doing it because you know deep down that by investing in yourself, you'll be able to create something that will be able to help so many more people.
Comply with also the restrictions that you have and to provide to everybody around?
Yeah, it was really complicated for us for a while because anything that was a refill, like a coffee cup or any containers at restaurants, weren't being refilled. We were thinking that we weren't able to refill as well customer containers. Now it turned out that it was only related to food products, but that didn't come out right away. So what we were doing was taking customers' containers, sanitizing them overnight, refilling them once we knew that they were clean and we could make contact with our containers. Our workload doubled, at least doubled. It was insane. So we would probably spend at least 3 hours a day cleaning out people's containers, and customers weren't allowed to touch any of the pumps. They weren't allowed to do any of the refilling themselves. And now we know that the refills were only restrictions on food products, and we were able to introduce that again and customers can fill again. But as far as it goes, our workload it skyrocketed because of all the extra steps in sanitizing, but also because we were selling so much actual hand sanitizer. We were also doing deliveries to people's homes to try and make sure that they would have access to products if they weren't able to come in store, or if they weren't comfortable coming in store. So that first summer, our hours were really long and it was really, really busy. So the pandemic actually, that first year was a benefit to a brand new business that had hand sanitizer and surface sanitizers.
That's for operations here.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to close anything? Did you have to change anything? How was the first adaptation through?
Yeah, I remember the first week when it was kind of looking like things were going to lock down. I remember specifically, being contacted by people saying, hey, this might be something for your business. And I remember really pulling back and being like, this is a really inappropriate time to be pushing our delivery service. I really didn't want to be capitalizing on sorrow. But what became very, very clear quickly is that this was a service that people needed, and we needed to step forward to service the people. So we made the decision that we were going to accept everybody and make sure that everybody got their food. There were other businesses and services that were like put up some boundaries around their company to, make sure that they could still do a good job, where we were like, we want to be here for our community. So in the very first week, the lockdowns were announced, we doubled, and the week after that, we doubled again. So we literally quadrupled in a 2-week period. So you can imagine a company quadrupling in 2 weeks, like the infrastructure and the chaos and the...
You're talking about the employees? The people working?
No, the amount of deliveries that we were doing. The amount of deliveries that we're doing quadrupled. And we had friends coming to help. I literally had friends showing up and us giving them 5 to 10 boxes and saying, hey, go out and here's your list, go drop these off. And it was pretty wild. It was a pretty wild experience. It it was really interesting to see our community come together. It was really beautiful to see everybody step up to help. And then it was also really fascinating to see how vulnerable we really were with our food systems. There was rumors of the trucks not coming in from California at times, borders being closed, and at any moment our food supply would be cut off. And so we were trying to navigate this chaos, and we would have to guess 2 weeks out, 1 to 2 weeks out of what we would need and order it. And then the trucks would show up and you would just get what you get. So it'd be like sometimes there's no broccoli, sometimes all the kale was rotten, sometimes you would get half of your order, and we would just have to make do. And for the most part, the customers were really understanding and really grateful just to be getting their food. Having said that, there were some people that were upset, but we really have a beautiful mantra at Farmbound, and we say, it's not about the lettuce. And so if somebody doesn't get their lettuce with their order, or something is not, super awesome, and they flip out, we know that there's people going through a lot of stress at that time. They were potentially losing their jobs, their businesses, their health was at risk. They didn't know what was going to be happening in the future. So there was a lot of stress floating around, and we were just really cognizant of that, and to not take it personally and then be there as a positive support system for our community.
I remember exactly, I remember vividly, because it was getting serious, and to the point, and you could see the town start to get very quiet. We were very, very slow. So I remember Trudeau addressed everyone on Tuesday, and we were very slow on Monday, and Tuesday was almost dead. Like basically nobody here. I was sending employees home, and I was really, really, you could feel that something was different. Something was really different. And I remember the announcement vividly. The video went live. It was the middle of lunch rush, but there was no lunch rush. And I think everyone was just watching and seeing what he was gonna say. And like a lot of business owners and people, I think I just kind of went into disbelief and fight or flight. You're like, I think what kept reassuring me was, this is not just happening to me, it's happening to everybody, and not just everyone in Canada, it's happening to the whole world. So I think that was, in a weird way, like reassuring to know, like, hey, you're not alone. And I think as humans, we all want to know that we're not alone. And that was really what I kind of hung on to. But I mean, I was one of probably maybe 20% of restaurants in Vernon that didn't shut down for the 2 weeks. But yeah, when you're told, oh, it's just 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I thought about it. I'm not gonna lie, I thought about it. I was like, okay, well, we could just close for a couple weeks and call it a day, not have to worry about this for a bit. We know that a lot of places are gonna close. We're not the only ones that are gonna do that. But I did have employees' livelihoods and stuff to think about. So I had certain employees that wanted to take a break and go on EI, and I knew that that was fine because we were probably gonna be slower. And then I had other employees that this was their livelihood, and that wasn't an option that they wanted to take. I had international employees that wouldn't even qualify for EI. So, as a leader and business owner, you kind of step into that role a little bit more. I mean, in 2020, I was 22 years old. So for me, still a young business owner. A lot of things are new for me, especially that. And I mean, I'll tell you, in my 5-year business plan, worldwide pandemic was not part of it by any means.
I was actually at work and I started feeling hot. I felt my fever immediately. I could not warm up. I had warm blankets on while I was standing in the OR. And I was like, there is no way I should be here right now. I have like one of the very first symptoms. So went home, got tested that day. And they actually lost my test results. It took me a week to get my test results back. So I was sitting there waiting for a week to find out what my results were. And of course, after a week getting no phone call, you're like, I'm probably negative, or they would have told me. And finally, I got a phone call that their machines were down in Kelowna, so they had to ship them to Vancouver, and then they lost my results, and then they found them, and I was positive. So then I was locked down on, I think it was me. There was 4 of us in the household. 3 of us were locked down. And then CDC called me every single morning to check in on me because it was still so new. So they'd ask me my symptoms that day. They'd get a fever reading from me every day and give me my next like rules for that day. So, and then slowly, because there's four of us living here, slowly they were just kind of letting each person know their rule. So like my fever lasted the longest, so I was on lockdown the longest, but everyone else in the household was allowed off isolation after they had symptoms or after they had no symptoms.
I think, and this still feels like it's true today, is it was a lot, I think, that we learned not that much prior to the public in terms of what was coming or what was not coming or how hard it would be or how vast it would be or what the impact was. We just kind of learned in the moment. I think people in the hospital tried to do what they could to prepare us, but there was just a lot of unknown about the whole thing, for sure.
And how did that make you feel?
And I just want to be super clear, this is my personal experience of it. Like all other nurses would have a vastly different experience.
Yeah.
So for me, how it made me feel was that it fueled my personal fire for change, because I felt that a real need for leadership really showed up. And, as everyone navigated what they could with what they had, I feel like a lot of the nurses and healthcare providers struggled a lot with supports and how to navigate a lot of the fear and a lot of the emotions and things they were asking to do. And so for myself personally, it came out as a real fire to step into my own leadership on how to address certain things that maybe our healthcare system can't address. And that's a lot to do with more of like stress and burnout and how do we deal with fear. Essentially, hospitals are incredible environments. They really are. They're places of healing and trauma and grace and beauty, and you get the whole spectrum of life in a hospital. And healthcare workers in particular that are drawn to that space are often like extremely caring, empathetic, giving people. And I think they can take on the emotions and they can take on fear and they can take on a lot of stuff. And I really saw that a lot through COVID, was the impact of what it had on them, trying to deal with this overwhelming emotion that came in with, as people did start to come in and they were very sick and navigating that and all that kind of stuff. But what really came out for me in my personal experience was that I didn't belong like at the bedside the whole time. I was being asked to step into something different, into a leadership. And I felt a lot of guilt in the beginning about thinking about leaving the bedside of an ICU, because in some ways I had a skill set that was the most needed at that time. But I also recognized that I had another skill set that was going to be more needed now. Or in the future and that kind of thing. And so putting time and space into also understanding what does leadership mean to me and how can that look was a really definitive experience throughout that time for me.
So our website was set up prior to the pandemic more for an information. You could go to our website to see the products that we had, and we did have some products that were already in containers that were available, but we had to revamp our website, and we probably spent a couple hundred hours adding on each individual product so that it could be purchased online, and then different sizes of the products as well. So there was a ton of work that went into developing our website. I think it was a benefit in the end because it kind of forced us to do all of that work, and it's now a much bigger website than it was originally, but it makes it easier for people to also understand kind of the concept of refilling and of the prices that they're going to pay for a product depending on the size. So it definitely was a lot of work, but beneficial. It was so much work. Oh my God. It was so much work.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Because we had to take like each product and put it into a bottle and then take a picture. It was
You're
crazy.
also just going through all that too, and like you're trying to make it look like somewhat.
Yeah.
nice, like each photo and
You can tell products that were added at that point because it's literally just get it on the counter and take a picture, put it up. And now it's like 10 minutes to get the right angle.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because people were on lockdown, they couldn't go to the grocery store. And with our food system, like everything is set up very hand to mouth, right? So you get, grocery stores only have maybe 3 to 7 days worth of inventory at a time. And so things are constantly coming in. If you think about in the Okanagan alone, how many meals per day are served in restaurants, those meals were now being prepared at home. And our food system was all set up to service the restaurant. So restaurants order things packaged differently in different size requirements and different portions. And so all of this stuff was in the pipeline, potatoes made into French fries, certain potatoes go to the French fry place, certain potatoes go for retail, depending on sizing requirements, grading requirements, all of these different things. And all of it was set up in a certain way. And then overnight, that all had to shift. So there was all this food in the pipeline designed for restaurants, and not enough food in the pipeline designed for grocery. So thousands and thousands of meals a day in Vernon BC alone now went from being prepared in a restaurant to being prepared in the home. So it was like turning this big ship in the ocean, which was chaotic. And we also didn't know how long it was gonna last. It was first announced like 3 weeks, that famous line, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Here we are 2 years later. But so, the ship is being turned, but at the same time, it's like, how much do you invest in the permanence of this ship being turned? Because like at any moment, like, okay, we could just go back and then suddenly we need French fries again for the restaurants, right? So it was really interesting trying to navigate that from a retail perspective. And then I'm sure with all of these food suppliers that were servicing the restaurants, like what do they do now with all of this stuff? I could not imagine the warehouse at a supplier for a restaurant with all of that fresh food. Like what happened to it all? What did they do? That would be a really fascinating story.
Yeah, so that was, I think, the biggest decision right early on was, are you going to close or are you going to stay open? And I remember feeling the divisiveness of the people as well very early on, because when it happened, we all kind of went to takeout preemptively just to feel like we were being safe. And then the government came forward and said, hey, you don't have to go to takeout. You can actually, as long as your tables are distanced, you can actually have in-house dining. So I remember posting that, hey, the government says that we can have in-house dining, so we're going to keep it. And I got absolutely just attacked on social media by everyone. Well, not everyone, but I got attacked by a lot of people. And, I respect a lot of, my friends and people that actually know me, because they're the ones that private messaged and said, hey, think about this. You might want to take this a little bit more seriously. Like, I know you're coming from the right place and you're not trying to do this maliciously, but like, think about how serious this is. And at that time, that made a lot of sense. And through talking to people, I thought, yeah, okay, we should just preemptively go to takeout. And then a week later, obviously, they made everyone go to takeout anyway. So it's just one of those things that was just constantly changing. I must have changed my floor plan like 3 times in 1 week to try and fit the new narrative and what was going on. But yeah, that was the big thing. What did we do in the first few weeks was, I think we got a feel for it after the first and second week that this is not going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This is not going to be 2 weeks. This is not going to be 2 months. This could be 6 months. This could very well be 6 months. Did we think it was going to be 2 years? Absolutely not. But we definitely knew that it was going to be a few months. And for me, it was like, at the bare minimum, if I can just pay my employees, I don't even need to take money for myself. I can figure it out. But if I, at the bare minimum, can just look after the people that have gotten me where I am, that was going to be a success for me. So yeah, we went straight to takeout. We looked at point of sale options to allow for curbside pickup, online ordering, just ease of contact so people could just come in and grab and go kind of thing. Spend as little time as possible. And then we started to have a little bit more fun because we realized we weren't coming in contact with as much people. The interactions weren't as long. It was literally just come in, grab and go. So we started thinking, okay, how can we start to do videos, do promotions, try new recipes, create more items to go for people, and really figure out, what are some new ways that we can, and new things that we can try.
So by the time I got back, obviously COVID had spread a little bit more than before. So every day we kind of had a new guideline, new rules to follow. In the OR, our main thing was surgical screening, so getting swabs done before they were allowed to have their surgeries done if it was an elective case. of course, lots of our elective cases were pushed back or canceled because our hospitals were at extreme capacities. We didn't have room for patients to have their surgeries and then have a bed after if they needed to recover in the hospital because we were so full. So we cut back on surgeries. There was a point where we were wrapping every machine in ROR in a garbage bag because I don't think they really knew what kind of surface or how long it would live on a surface for. So I think they were just trying to do as many preventative things as they could. And then, like I said, lots of our nursing staff from the OR was deployed to other parts of the hospital. So they had sent out emails and asked people to go. Long-term care was crazy busy, so they needed to get some nurses sent to the long-term care. And then whichever department of the hospital people had previous experience in, they were just sending them there. Lots of people to emergency, lots of people to the COVID ward. They tried to keep our OR nurses off the COVID ward because, we're pretty high risk, our surgical patients. So they don't really want us going to the COVID ward and then coming back and working with such high risk patients, right? Honestly, our guidelines and our rules just changed every single day. And it was just kind of learning to adapt and figure out what our rules were that day. Personally, I had not seen extreme cases in the COVID unit. I heard about it, and I knew that there was nurses that were being deployed over there that were having to go and just rotate patients so that they could assist with their breathing every 15 to 30 minutes, I think, was the rotating schedule. I'm not completely sure because I wasn't part of it, but so I did hear it was quite severe, and I mean, if they were taking up that many ICU beds, it had to be. So,
an opportunity to work for BC Transplant, a part-time job came up, so I quit my full-time job. And I just knew that the strain and the toll of working at the bedside for 12-hour shifts, 60 hours a week plus, it takes a lot of energy from you. And at the end of the day, I just evaluated that I didn't have enough energy to create and to try to think about this other stuff if I was working full-time at the bedside. So an opportunity to work for BC Transplant came up in a part-time line, so I applied for that. And so that created a bit more time and space. So I worked for BC Transplant a few days a week, and then with casual in intensive care and casual in the recovery room. And I was able to just create a little bit more time for myself and a little bit more time to reflect and work on the farm. And that's when this other kind of roles of leadership I was able to actually sit with it a little bit, to be able to give it the time it needed to be honest, to not be in complete burnout, which a lot of healthcare workers were. I had experienced burnout historically in my life, working in Edmonton and things like that, and I knew it wasn't a place I could go again and still be able to answer this call that I was feeling to leadership.
I did get a phone call pretty early on from a reporter asking about our business and if we were going to have to shut down because refills weren't available on products. But again, because that was just food related refills, we were able to stay open, but it did take quite a while to figure out what the actual ins and outs of refilling were going to be. And I can say that there really weren't any guidelines that were available for us. So it took a while to figure it out. Some of our suppliers are locals that generally go to the markets. So they weren't able to go to the market. So this was one of their best venues to be able to sell their products and wholesale their products and still keep their businesses active. And it was great. And just to hear from them how grateful they were that their customers still had access to all their great products, and that the volume that was going through here was really great and was easy, like a great way to support them. So it's heartwarming to see that people were able to benefit from purchasing here and supporting our local suppliers.
Think about that for a second, the mass of those amount of meals, all of the fast food restaurants, think about a single fast food restaurant, how many hamburgers do they serve in a day? And how many of those are in Vernon? And then you have eat-in restaurants and Subway and all of these little, how many meals in one city are served a day in a restaurant? All of those are now being prepared at home. That's a lot of food.
I didn't realize too that the prep would be a lot different as well.
Yeah.
versus a restaurant versus a grocery store. Yeah.
Totally, and the infrastructure is not set up to service that. So like the infrastructure is set up to serve restaurants. So there's bulk. Bulk, exactly. And so like there's a massive warehouse in Kelowna for Cisco. They're like the biggest supplier of restaurants, and all of this food and all of the trucks, like there wasn't another issue. There weren't enough trucks. Even if the food was able to be packaged differently and sent through the other distribution channels, there weren't enough trucks that were designated to be delivering to the grocery stores on a regular basis for their increase in demand. Like there's so many pieces that go into our food system that are so delicate because they're all timed they have to be timed perfectly. Because after you harvest lettuce, you only have so many days before it's rotten. So it has to go here and be packaged and supply chain and cold chain. And it's a very, very delicate system. And it was just like, it exploded and had to be rebuilt overnight. Like literally. Like tomorrow. Okay, now what?
That's crazy.
Yeah.